Hi, my name's Murphy. This is my channel, Murphy's Every Whim. On this channel, I talk about books because I love to talk about books and I love to talk. Let's face it. This is my outlet. YouTube, BookTube is my outlet. It's afternoon. It's a sunny day, although there were thunderstorms earlier. I would have videoed yesterday, but there were thunderstorms all day. I just don't know how, even though I'm wearing a mic, I'm not sure how outside sounds come through on the video before I make it. And I don't want to have to find out after that there was thunder all the time. It's quiet in the house right now, except for the air conditioner. And so I'm going to talk about books. I have two books to talk about today and a genre. And the genre is post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic books. And the two books are Dies the Fire by S.M. Stirling and Odd Billy Todd by N.C. Reid. I've actually tried to start writing something up for my blog or for this script many times this week, and I kept falling down rabbit holes. One rabbit hole I fell down, I've just finished The Majestic 311 by Keith Blackmore, and it's definitely horror. And I once said that I'm not really interested in horror, and when I step back and think about it, I actually do read horror books, and most of them fall under the category of post-apocalyptic. So I fell down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out how I felt about horror books. And clearly within horror there are subgenres that I like and don't like. But like I said, most are post-apocalyptic. These two books, Dies the Fire and Odd Billy Todd, I finished this month. Both of them are lengthy. The book format, the paper format, is 576 pages for one of them and 510 for the other. And I listened to both of them. The listening length is between 25 and 28 hours at a one times speed on Audible. I listened to both of them episodically. I would listen for a while and then put it away for a while. So actually Dies the Fire, I might have been trying to read for about 3 years now. Finished for 3 years. Odd Billy Todd is less than a year because I found the story less aggravating. They're both long, and long isn't bad. I've read longer books. Pillars of the Earth, Reamdy by Stevenson. I'm reading Lonesome Dove right now. Long books aren't a bad thing, but these two books, because they were post-apocalyptic, I've read a lot of that genre, they were both on occasion obvious and tedious. And I just didn't feel the need to sit down and listen to it every day. So the mechanisms for the apocalypse in these two books are different. In Odd Billy Todd, a disease spreads quickly and in a week wipes out 95% of the population. It's not clear from the book if that's just locally, say in the United States, or worldwide. That's not important to the plot. What's important to the plot is 95% of the people are gone and 5% are left. Billy Todd, it's called Odd Billy Todd because he's non-neurotypical, and I don't really want to talk about how he's different, how he's odd, and how that plays into the book, except that because of him being non-neurotypical, people thought he was not intelligent. and that was simply not the case. So, but anyway, that's an interesting part of the book at the beginning and then a little bit towards the end, but really it didn't play that much into the book. And when it did play into the book, it was just the same thing over and over again. Billy Todd coming up with an idea and someone else saying, why didn't I think of that? Over and over again. The story is Odd Billy Todd's parents happened to be preppers, and they passed away like 4 years before the book starts. And they had also, because Billy was non-neurotypical, they had given him both the structural tools and the knowledge base that he needed to do well in the world. He ran a garage, so he had some, a repair garage. So he had some mechanical skills. He could work on engines and anything that was gasoline or diesel driven. He lived out on their farm at home. He did a little bit of farming. He had some horses, and he was also proficient at hunting and could track pretty good. So he had these kinds of skills. When the disease came through and killed off everyone, he started scavenging in town for things that he needed. He started building up his stores of materials and food, and actually things that he could trade in the future. So feminine protection products, diapers, formula, things that he knew that other people would need, and he could trade his skills or food for, or that to get food or other things that he needed. But on the one hand, because there weren't that many people around, he could scavenge wherever he wanted. The things he had to fight were rats, because there were dead bodies everywhere. The rats weren't as bad a problem as they were, say, in Blackmore's The Mountain Men series, because they were just rats. But then there were also groups of people who had created gangs that went around and pillaged and killed and enslaved people, and so he also had to watch out for them. He had some other people in his little farming community outside of town that were still alive, and he worked with them to get things started in terms of protection and building what they needed and gathering what they needed. And then as time went on, they added other people to their community, people with skills. So they particularly liked people who could provide something. So they had electricians and contractors and farmers and horsemen and people who could shoe horses. So blacksmith, whatever they needed, they found conveniently. So it's really a story about this community. Unlike some books, post-apocalyptic books, there were some forays into town or into places that involved battle. And those did not overwhelm the whole story of community building. The narrator, sorry, I can't think of his name right now, but I'll put it up on the screen. The narrator is really good. This happens in Tennessee, and so he has a Tennessee-ish accent, good enough for me. I'm from southern Arkansas, so when I diverge into my southern accent, it's not quite the same as this Tennessee accent, but I'm sure people from Tennessee or from this area would complain about the accent. And so it was a good book in that I liked the people. The story was all about building things. So this was actually comparable to the children's books that I talked about some weeks ago, where children were runaways or were abandoned in some way, and they had to build their own way. So as an adult, I'm still reading that kind of book. It had a relatively satisfying ending, and it's just one book, not a series. Dies the Fire by S.M. Stirling. The mechanism for the apocalypse in that is some magical, mysterious thing that eliminated all possible power and technology that came after the Bronze Age. So effectively, this apocalypse threw everyone back into the Bronze Age. And so in that way, it's similar to The Arrest. In The Arrest by Lethem, they're not quite back in the Bronze Age. They still have the ability to have motorcycles and things like that, as long as they can get gas that'll work, because gas will deteriorate over time. But in this book, in Dies the Fire, they're in the Bronze Age, and that was a mechanism that allowed the author Stirling to create two different communities, one based on a Wiccan coven with a high priestess, Juniper, and the other one based on a militaristic, Bronze Age, but militaristic ethos, and that one led by a guy named Mike, who was a U.S. Marine. Both groups gathered in the people that they needed with the skills that they needed. So in some way similar to Billy Todd, they had blacksmiths, but they didn't have any electricians or contractors. Instead, they had farmers and people who knew how to preserve food and husbandry and those sorts of things. Because there were more people left after the change, as it's called in Dies the Fire, because there are more people left. I mean, some people died. There were plane crashes. People died because they were dependent on technology to live. But a larger percentage than 5% survived the change, and that was a bigger problem. Both of these groups, the group led by Mike the Marine was called the Bear Killers, and the group led by Juniper is the Clan Mackenzie. And both of these groups had to leave some place and travel to another place that they thought was possibly safe. For Clan Mackenzie, it was Juniper's cabin in rural Oregon, and for the Bear Killers, they weren't called the Bear Killers at that time, they became the Bear Killers. The Bear Killers moved to an estate that in Willamette River Valley, that was owned by one of the people that was in that group. And both built sustainable communities, but they really needed each other. The Clan Mackenzie did protect themselves and did have the weapons and horses that they needed, but they were more on the farming side, and the Bear Killers were more militaristic and they provided support to Clan Mackenzie for protection, and so they worked together. But they had, like in Odd Billy Todd, groups of people who had built gangs, who enslaved people, who were going around raping and pillaging and all those terrible things that happen in post-apocalyptic books to, the bad people that happen to the good people. And but they had more of that. They had to spend much more time protecting themselves, doing scouting, finding out what's going on in different places. Like I said, both books were long and sometimes obvious and tedious. Odd Billy Todd is a nice story with nice people. there is one situation that in my mind I can't reconcile. I would protect myself if I was attacked, not in my home. You can come to my front door without fear, no matter who you are. But if I was in a situation like Odd Billy Todd or in Dies the Fire, I would protect myself. But how far would I go? And Odd Billy Todd, Billy kind of went maybe further than I think I would. But then again, there's a situation where it's, what would you do? How would you deal with this? Is there a good way out that keeps you from having to step over that line? But in Dies the Fire, it's really just protect themselves with whatever weapons they can build, because they had to build their own weapons. I think there was one bow in the group before, and they all had horses, which was an advantage. Which brings me to the whole idea of post-apocalyptic novels. It seems that we always hear this from the standpoint of the viewpoint of the survivors. And both of these novels end with things possibly going on into the future. And in the case of Dies the Fire, it's the first book in the Emberverse universe. And so life does go on, whereas in some post-apocalyptic books, like let's say Zone 1 by Colson, Whitehead, things don't work out so well in the end, at least for the people in the immediate, the people we look at. But everyone we read about has skills, has, in the case of Billy Todd, opened stores for anything they needed. That aspect of it, that, building up a community after a big change, is old hat now. And I'd like to see something a little different. The Arrest by Jonathan Lethem was a little bit different in that it was really talking about post-apocalyptic stories. It was a meta story. But anyway, I was going to try to say something witty there, but if I don't prepare it, I probably am not going to come up with something witty. So another rabbit hole I fell down into was looking at what types of mechanisms, scenarios are used in post-apocalyptic books, and which ones have I read, which ones, and I was also thinking which ones of those were horror books. And I don't have an exhaustive list yet, but I have a pretty good list of the books I've read and the types of post-apocalyptic situations that they fall under. And so disease, as in Odd Billy Todd and The Stand, technological failure, and Dies the Fire, The Arrest, and then 1 Second After by William Forstchen. William Forstchen are all technological failures for some reason or another. Many zombie books, Zone 1, The Girl with All the Gifts, The Passage by Justin Cronin, and then one for fun, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Dawn of the Dreadfuls, Alien Invasion, The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, Ender's Game, Orson Scott Card, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and The War of the Worlds. I looked at lists, and they also had the 3 Body Problem, and I guess that's an alien invasion. I don't know how. I've only read the first book in the series. I don't know how the other 2 go. Astronomical catastrophe, the only thing I could come up with was the ending of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and so that's not one of these that I go into very much. On the other hand, environmental, ecological catastrophes other than disease, I came up with a lot. The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, Greener Than You Think by Ward Moore, which I read decades ago, but the images in that book I still think about. The Road by Cormac McCarthy, Make Room by Harry Harrison, and that is the book that they made the movie Soylent Green from. Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood, and The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi. Machine, Robot, AI Uprising. The best thing I could come up with that I've read is Avogadro Corp by William Hertling, which is not necessarily an apocalypse in the sense that we usually think of them, but rather is taking over the world by AI in order to make the world better. Nuclear Holocaust and War, A Canticle for Leibowitz, The Second Sleep by Robert Harris, The Postman by David Brin, On the Beach by Neville Shute, a classic, Alas Babylon by Pat Frank, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, and the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. All had worlds that had been destroyed or devastated by war. Reproductive Failure, The Children of Men by P.D. James, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and Why the Last Man comic book series. Social Collapse. Someone had on their list Foundation by Isaac Asimov, and this book just, the characters predict it, but I'm not sure it really happens. And so Parable of the Sower was probably the best one I found that I'd read by Octavia Butler. And then Divine Prophecy, a really fun read, Good Omens by Gaiman and Pratchett. So it seems that I'm not a big fan of social collapse or robots taking over, and I am more of a fan of natural situations, ecological situations, things that possibly could happen, or just sudden changes like the loss of technology, which actually could happen with an EMP, and everyone dying out for some reason. I'm sure that's, a fantasy in my mind, if only, the people I wanted to not be around weren't around anymore. That would make life easier for me, but clearly not as interesting. So after digging my way out of a couple of rabbit holes, I decided to group these two books together and talk about them. I thought about adding the Mountain Man series by Blackmore to this list, but I just felt like these two were very much like each other, and Mountain Man goes off in a kind of a different direction, and I'll talk about that sometime. That is clearly horror and apocalyptic. So, how do I feel about horror? I still don't know. We'll see. Okay, so that's what I have to say about these two books and this whole big genre. I have some other videos that I want to put together and get out, so I think I'll go do that. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.